Welcome. My name is William Layton. I'm a soybean farmer with the United Soybean Board, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit today about sustainability, what I do on my farm, and the value of our soybeans. I'm a third generation farmer. I grew up in Vienna, Maryland, and that's where I still farm. My farm has been in my family for over 70 years. My great-grandfather first moved to our farm as a sharecropper. My grandfather raised enough money to buy the farm. My father farmed all his life, and I've been farming with my father for 18 years now. My wife, Jennifer, farms with me. We grow corn, soybeans, and wheat, but about 10 years ago, we added grapes to our operation and diversified into agritourism, making wine. So now we've got 14 acres of grapes, along with the 1,300 acres of corn, soybeans, and wheat. In Maryland, we grow a lot of soybeans. We grow about 192,000 hectares. Our average yield is about 44 bushels to the acre, but that's kind of deceiving because here in Maryland, we grow soybeans starting in May, planting soybeans in May, but we go all the way out to July 15th or 20th, and sometimes even longer depending. Because we have such a long growing season, we can grow what we call full season soybeans, where we plant them early and let them grow for about 4 months. But we can also plant them later and let them grow later in the season, but only grow them 2 to 3 months. It gives us a lot of flexibility. Obviously, the later planted soybeans have lower yields, and the earlier planted soybeans have higher yields. So we can grow soybeans as high as 85 bushels to the acre and as low as 30 depending when they're planted. So the average is about 44. What are U.S. soybean growers doing to meet global demand? We're working a lot with soybeans, doing innovation, working on the composition of the soybean, creating a better soybean, creating sustainable farming practices so that we're a part of the global environment and making sure that we leave the land better than we found it. And not just the land that we grow, but the land around us. And that's very important. I mean, it's very important everywhere, but where I am here in Maryland, we're surrounded by water. We're on a peninsula. I've got the Chesapeake Bay on one side of us. We've got the Atlantic Ocean on the other side of us. So we're surrounded by water, and everything we do here matters. If we put too much fertilizer down, it can end up in about one of those bodies of waters. So we're very aware of the environment around us and do a lot to make sure that we continue to preserve that and protect that. And having a consistent supply, making sure that soybeans are available when and where everybody needs them. Innovation and sustainability. Looking at innovation, both in the soybean itself and in sustainability practices, is something that we've done for a long time. High oleic soybean oil is a great example of innovation in the bean. Trans fats became a big problem several years ago, and we looked at how can we create a better bean, a bean that doesn't have to go through processes that cause trans fats, a bean that is more stable both in shelf life and in the fryer, in the heat when it goes to it, a bean that is heart healthy by not having those trans fats. And we came up with high oleic soybeans, a bean that we've been growing for a number of years now and has really proven itself to be a superior soybean. Verified sustainability practices. We have to go through a lot of tracking, reporting, and this all goes to verify the practices that we are doing all over the U.S. to grow sustainable soybeans. We grow soybeans with the best practices in mind, and we report those. You can verify and see exactly what we're doing and the soybeans that we're growing. Nutrient-dense soybeans, looking at the proteins and the oils. We have the best soybeans in the world when it comes to what's in those soybeans, and we continue to innovate and work on that. High oleic soybeans, as I said, were a real breakthrough for us. It's better for consumption, it's better for heart health, it's better for manufacturing and baking, it's better for food preparers. It really doesn't have downsides. It's a great soybean for use for everybody. Human health, the fat profile is that because it doesn't have the trans fats, it's much better, lower saturated fats. It makes it the soybean that you want to eat and makes it one of the healthiest oils out there. It's better for manufacturers and bakers because it has that stability. It has the extended shelf life. It doesn't need the partial hydrogenation. It's a neutral flavor. It doesn't impart different flavors. And I've talked to, in my different presentations and travels, a lot of different food scientists and bakers, and different oils impart different flavors. Soybeans don't do that. They impart a neutral flavor, and having the neutral flavor so your food can taste like what you want it to, not something else, plus these benefits really make it such a better product. As I talked about industrial, less buildup of polymers, less absorption, high smoking point. This really just means that it lasts a long time in the fryer or in production. It's such a better product to be able to use. Any amount of time that you can leave it more than a regular oil is such a benefit and such a cost savings. High oleic has a great availability. We have a lot of soybeans out there. We're continually planting more and more acres or hectares of high oleic soybeans. We were only at 125,000 hectares 2 years ago. We're at over 300,000 this year, and within 4 years we expect to more than quadruple that and be at over 2 million. So we expect to have a lot of these soybeans and a lot of this oil available very, very quickly. For farmers, we want to be able to grow this soybean. It has the traits that we want. It is a better soybean, and so brings a premium for us, and we can use the practices that we're familiar with out in the field for this soybean. Again, on innovation, we are working on research, on nutrient research for animals. Feed is where most soybeans go to, and so making sure that it has the maximum nutrition for all animals. In my area, chickens is what most of the feed goes to, but in other areas it can be hogs, it can be cattle, it can be aquaculture, it can be fish. They're always working to make sure that different soybeans have the maximum nutrition for each of the products that it's going to. Sustainable production practices. And this is where I have the most experience because I'm the farmer out there. They're growing these. Production has increased greatly year over year, but specifically the slide we're looking at is over the last 40 years. 2,000 kilograms per hectare in 1981, 3,400 today. We're growing a lot more soybeans on the same land. Not only are we growing more soybeans and more crops of all kind, but we're growing it with less pesticides, with less fertilize, with less inputs because we're doing it so much more efficiently. There's a lot of ways that we are sustainable, conserving resources for the next generation. Sustainability is a tricky word. It can mean a lot of things. For me, it's the fact that I'm a third generation farmer, and I'm making a living on the same land that my father and my grandfather made a living on, and that future generations are going to continue to be able to make a living on. And it's my job to make sure that they have the ability to continue to do that. Increasing biodiversity. is one of the things that shows here. And that's big for us. We use a crop rotation, putting different crops in the field so you don't have the same crops there. So you have different insects, different diseases, but different crops use nitrogen and put nitrogen back in there. And then even when we're not growing a cash crop, we're putting cover crops into the field. So you're getting the advantage of those cover crops, which can break up the soils, which can add nutrients to the soils, can keep nutrients from going through the soil and disappearing into the water supply. We're doing this to protect not only our own farm, but also the land around us. Most of my farms are connected to water in some way, whether they border on a river, whether they border on a wetlands that's connected to a river, or they have big ditches that run out to rivers. And so me protecting my land protects the lands around us. As I said, in the last 40 years, 96% more soybeans grown in that same amount of time, but with 66% less soil erosion. One of the things that we do to protect for soil erosion is no-till farming. 50 years ago, most of the land was tilled, and that just means that you run a plow across it or a disc across it, and you take the ground and you turn it over, you break it up so that you have a nice soft seed bed to plant into. But that's not always the best for the ground. What's best for the ground is just to leave it alone, leave it exactly how it is, and be able to plant directly into that, plant into the ground that's there, the plants that are there, the residue that's there, the insects. My father's always a big proponent of earthworms. The more earthworms you have in the soil, the better the soil is. And the less you turn it over, the less you disturb it, the more of that you have. And so we're protecting the soil health, protecting the erosion, which can get rid of our soils, but also, again, pollute the soils that are around us. Less emissions. Again, going back to the no-till example, one of the great things about that is if you don't have to turn the ground over and till it, you're not using as much fuel, you're not creating the emissions, you're not running the tractor. We do so much less tractor work than we did 50 years ago. Instead of running over the ground with a tractor 10 times, we're only doing it 5 times. Instead of having to work it up twice and again at the end of the year and different things, we're just running over it to spray it, to plant it, and to harvest it. Doing as little as possible. So we're using up less energy, creating less emissions. We're using less land to do it. Land is a limited resource. Farmland is always disappearing, turning into houses and other things. So we're doing more soybeans on less land all the time. Interestingly, while U.S. cropland is disappearing, forest land is increasing. We've increased over 1 million, or just about 1.5 million hectares over the last 40 years. Part of that, and I'll just give you my experience from a global perspective. I can't tell you all around the country, but from our perspective, you see when farmland is not productive, sometimes it goes into houses, but more times than not, it goes back into forest. Bad cropland makes really good forest land. Hunting is big around here, and having nice wooded areas for wildlife, and that's what often it goes back into. And so sometimes as we lose cropland, it does go back into forest land, which is great overall for the environment and being able to sequester carbon and those kinds of things. Our yields have increased 55%, and that's something I've talked about through the presentation here. And that goes back to a lot of things. It goes back to the practices we use, irrigating and being smart with irrigation. Irrigation has changed a lot over the last 30 years. I have water sensors in the soil that tell me when I need to irrigate, and more importantly, when I don't need to irrigate. Because most farmers, the base idea is to put on as much water as possible. I mean, you don't want it to get too dry, so you're going to make sure it's plenty wet. But you don't always need that, and irrigation is not just using too much water. But those are run by either electricity or diesel fuel. So you're creating, again, emissions, you're using energy. And so if you can use electronic moisture sensors, put it in the ground and tell when to water and when not to, you're doing a lot to save the environment. We're making ourselves more efficient, and overall we're growing better crops. So the water management, the nutrient management, we use GPS site-specific precision technology to know exactly where to put fertilize in the field. Some areas need more fertilize, some areas need less fertilize. And again, it goes back to you grow better crops when you put the nitrogen and the other fertilize where it needs to be. But you also reduce pollution, because if you have fertilize where it doesn't need to be, the plant's not going to take it up, and it's going to end up in a water supply somewhere down the line. And so most of the things we do are great in the sense that you're protecting the environment, you're being more sustainable, but we're also making ourselves more efficient, saving money, and growing better crops by doing this. And pest management. Pest management is another thing. Again, spraying for insects or fungus that we don't need to is wasteful and polluting. We actually pay a scout who goes out through our field once a week. They walk every single one of our fields every single week, and then they'll send us a report and say, in this field you have so many grasshoppers, in this field you have some mildew problems, in this field maybe you have another problem. In the rest of the fields, you're fine. And so you only take care of problems when they're a problem, not just as a blanket protection. Again, it saves pollution, it saves money, it makes us more efficient, and it makes us grow better crops. Filter strips are one of the last things on here. I think I've talked about most things on this slide. But filter strips around waterways, again, as I talked about, most of our fields have water around them to some degree. And so what we'll do is put strips around the field anywhere from 10 to 30 feet, depending on how big a waterway we have at the end of the field, to kind of buffer the field, so that if we get a big rain and there's fertilizer on top of the ground still, pesticides on top of the ground, that it's got a grass filter strip to go through that helps to filter that out and protect the waterway before something gets to it. Erosion, and protect that. So we use those around all of our fields to protect them from that runoff. So I talked about the no-till and the precision ag technology. Tractors, if you haven't been in a tractor, maybe you've never been in a tractor, but if you haven't been in a tractor in a number of years, it's amazing. They are so computerized. Most of the tractors have two different computers built into the tractor, and then a third computer that we will install in the tractor to control the implement that's behind us. They have GPS, they have auto steer, so we put the tractor in the field and it drives itself in a straight line down the field. It's amazing, the technology in those tractors, and again, it just helps to make us more efficient, more sustainable, create less emissions, use less energy, and grow better crops. So these are some examples of the things that are done in my field, and in fields all across the country. As I said, we can do a great job of tracking what farmers are doing, which gives us that verified sustainability, and seeing everything that goes on. I hope I've answered a lot of your questions, but I'm ready to answer questions if you have any. Thank you very much.